Welcome to Common Ground Online. I'm Cami Ryan, and I am so excited that you chose today to join us. Last week, we took a close look at how God chooses to speak to us and guide our decisions. This week, we are going to continue looking at the life of Paul. Paul's journey was pretty spectacular. Let's just say he might have had his own Titanic experience. I know it's crazy, right? But before we get started, just a reminder, if you need prayer anytime during this service, someone is always standing by and would love to chat privately with you. Just click the prayer button on your screen. One of the greatest advantages to Church Online is being able to share the gifts and talents of people from all over the world with you. I would like to introduce to you some of my friends and ministry partners, Jordan and Kayla Grizzard. They have just moved to a new church in Arkansas this month, but thanks to our online church platform, they can lead us in worship right here, right now. Thank you, Jordan and Kayla. We are so thankful for you. Please join them and sing along from wherever you are today.
I raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies, and I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief, and I raise a hallelujah 'cause my weapon is a melody. I raise a hallelujah. Oh, heaven comes to fight for me.
I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, death is defeated, you is
That's right. Come on, sing it out. And I raise a hallelujah with everything inside of me. Yeah. And I raise a hallelujah. Yes, I watch the darkness flee. Yes. And I raise a hallelujah in the middle of the mystery. And I raise a hallelujah. Fear you lost your hold on me. Yeah, I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is alive. Oh, I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated, the King is In the middle of storms, middle of valleys, on top of mountaintops, does not matter the season or situation that we find ourselves in, our God is still worthy to be praised. So let's make a choice today, this morning, this evening, whenever you're watching, to declare the goodness of God, to sing a song that says, in the presence of my enemies, I will choose to sing, I will choose to praise, I will choose to raise a hallelujah, and I will trust Him in every circumstance. Come on, let's sing it. And sing a little louder. Come on and sing a little louder. Sing a little louder. Come on and sing a little louder. gonna sing a little louder.
Presence of my enemy,
Yes, sing a little louder.
louder than the unbelief.
We're gonna sing a little louder.
My weapon,
Come on and sing a little louder.
presence come to fight for me.
Yeah, sing a little louder. With the presence of my enemy. Sing a little louder. Louder than the unbelief. Sing a little louder.
My
Weapon is a melody. Come on and sing a little louder.
weapon come to fight for me.
Come on and sing a little louder. And I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praises roar up from the ashes. Hope will arise. Death is defeated. The King is alive. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder. You're gonna hear my praises roar up from the ashes. Hope will arise. Death is defeated. The King is alive. Yeah, the King is alive. Let's sing this out. And I raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemy. I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief.
All right, man. So thankful for my friends Jordan and Caleb. By the way, Jordan made it really far in American Idol season something, long time ago. He's a great singer. I know you enjoyed that. He's going to sing some more here in just a little bit, he and Kayla. So we've been talking about the book of Acts and kind of working our way through the formation of the church since Jesus died, resurrected, back to heaven, all of that. The book of Acts starts, and we've been following this along for like the last 4 or 5 months, and we are finally on the home stretch. Tonight we're going to talk about a little bit near the end of this, and then next week we'll talk a little bit more and then be finished. But where we pick up the story today is that Paul, the Apostle Paul, he had been out sharing Jesus with people all over the place, and he's working his way back to Jerusalem. Now, everybody had said to Paul, whatever you do, don't go to Jerusalem, because they knew that he would be arrested and potentially killed there for all of the work he was doing on behalf of Christ. And so he didn't care. He was like, look, I'm going to Jerusalem. That's where I know that God's leading me to go. And I know last week, Casey really laid that out well for us in terms of how Paul heard and understood the will of God for his life. And he knew God's will was to go to Jerusalem. So we went to Jerusalem. And when he got there, sure enough, long story short, he was indeed arrested, and he was beaten, and he was threatened with his life multiple times, and just a lot of really amazing, crazy things happened. And if you want to read the last few chapters of Acts, I highly recommend it. We're skipping over some amazing stories. But finally, Paul, somewhere along the way in all of that, said since he was a Roman citizen, he requested that he could be tried by Caesar in Rome himself, rather than by one of these district courts like out in Israel. And so that's exactly what they were compelled to do that. And so they put him in prison to wait for a ship to come along that could take him to Rome. So finally the right ship comes along, and Paul and his traveling companion Luke, who actually writes the book of Luke, and he also writes Acts. So if you're reading Acts and you're like, and we did this or we did that, that's Luke writing for he and Paul, or he and whoever. But so Luke gets on the ship. Some other criminals get on the ship, and then the crew. And so they take off, and this boat was going to make a few stops along the way. And it stopped one time in what is modern-day Syria, and was there for a couple of days. And then it moved on northwest to modern-day Turkey, and it hung out there for a little bit. And then they were going to try to make it kind of a cross over to to where is like far west Turkey. But as it turns out, the winds really started blowing, and they ended up realizing they weren't going to be able to make that open sea trek. And so they went down to an island called Crete. They didn't stop there. They were just going to go south of the island of Crete so that the winds coming out of the north wouldn't hit them quite so hard. And so they made their way to a place called Fairhaven on the south side of the island of Crete, and it was a great place, and they could have stayed there. In fact, Paul, he told the guys on the ship, he's like, look, I know you're the commanders of the boat, but I highly recommend that we stay here for the winter. It was late fall, the weather was going to get even worse. Just stay here, or the ship might be ruined, and we might even all lose our lives. And the captain of the ship listened to the deckhands, and they all were like, no, we can make it. Let's keep going west. And they were trying to make it a little bit further to the west side to a place called Phoenix, which was farther west on the southwest corner of Crete. Well, they took off towards Phoenix, and there was a nice southerly breeze for a while, so they're like all excited, we're going to make it to Phoenix to spend the winter. But as it turns out, right as they were getting excited, a northeaster blew in and started to push them out to sea, and they realized there was no way with any kind of sailing that they had ever learned that they were ever going to be able to make it to where they were trying to go. And so they just kind of let it go. And the ship started moving south, and it started moving west, and it started moving all over the place, and there were waves, and there was wind, and it got dark, and it was rain, and it was just this horrible weather, and they tried a lot of things. They pulled the lifeboats in onto the deck of the ship. They tried letting out a anchor to kind of float behind them so that they could maybe slow the boat down some. They actually, interestingly, tied the front of the hull together with ropes. I'm not sure how they were able to do that, but they were trying to just hold the whole ship together in some way. It's crazy, all the things they did. They were throwing cargo overboard to try to lighten the ship. They threw some of even the ship's instruments overboard to try to lighten the ship even more. And it was so dark, and they didn't know exactly what to do, and they didn't know where they were, and they were just out there in the middle of nowhere for a really long time, and it was unletting. And these guys lost hope, okay? All of the crew lost hope. They just assumed that they were going to die. So in the middle of one night, an angel came to visit Paul on the ship and said, Paul, you're going to make it. Everybody else is going to make it. The boat may not make it, but you guys are going to survive. And so Paul went up to talk to all of the crew of the ship, and he said, look, guys, we're going to survive this thing. You need to have faith. You need to have hope. But first of all, he told them, I told you so. I told you we shouldn't have left Fairhaven. Everything was fine there, but sure enough, you guys wouldn't listen to me. But he said, we're all going to survive, but don't try to get off the ship. Don't try to get into the lifeboats. Just hang out. It's going to be okay. And so I don't know how much faith that bolstered in them, but the storms continued. And 14 days into this crazy, ravishing storm, they finally started to sense that they were coming close to land. And they let down a rope, and it was they found out that the bottom of the sea, the Mediterranean, was 120 feet deep at that point. And then a little bit of time passed by, and they let down a rope again, and there was only 90 feet deep. So they knew that they were getting shallow, and they were getting close to land, and it was midnight. And so what they did is they dropped all 4 anchors to try to just like slow this thing to a stop. And the Bible says that they prayed for daylight. And I love that phrase. They prayed for daylight. Have you ever had a time in your life like that? Man, pray for daylight. Just, God, get us through this night, this dark night of our soul. But anyway, they prayed for daylight. And the next morning, when it just kind of started to be light, just a little bit, Paul came upstairs, and he's talking to these guys. He said, look, y'all need to eat. Nobody's eaten in 14 days. Let's have a meal. Paul broke bread, gave them the bread, and then they threw the wheat overboard, and they threw everything else overboard, and they looked over, and they saw a little bit of land. They saw a sandbar. The sun was coming up. It was dark, but they could see barely the sandbar. And so they cut off the anchors, and they were going full force. They let the sails up and they're going full force for land, thinking maybe we can just make it to the sand. The ship will be destroyed, but maybe we can survive. And so they started going, and then there was this rise in the of the land underneath the water, and they hit that. The boat stopped. It's starting to destroy. What are they going to do? And Paul and everybody finally at this point jumps overboard, and they start swimming for land. Those that couldn't swim were hanging on to whatever they could hang on to kind of float to land. And sure enough, 176 people on board, every single one of them was safe. And they found out that where they were was the island of Malta. And the people were really nice to them, and they built them a fire. And, this isn't really part of the story. I'm just kind of telling you the story so Casey can come and teach from it. But I think I love this part. So there's a fire, it's raining. Remember, it's winter now. And they were just swimming in the Mediterranean in the winter. And it's like super cold. They don't, they're just shivering. They're standing around the fire. Paul reaches into the fire to grab a stick or something, and a snake comes out and bites him on the arm. And the locals know that that's a really poisonous snake and that he's going to die. And so they say, that guy must be a murderer. He's getting what he deserves. Well, Paul, the Bible says he literally shook the snake off his arm. I love that. He shook the snake off his arm, and he didn't die. And they changed their story. They, instead of saying he's a murderer, now they said, well, he's a god. And so he's like, I'm neither. But eventually, so 3 months later, they spend the winter there, and Paul heals a bunch of people. He gains a lot of favor because he's just, he's a great man of God. And he just has a good 3 months there serving the people of Malta. And they put him on another boat, and he finally makes his way to Rome. And we'll kind of finish up Acts next week. But I wanted to share that story with you today, A, because I think it's one of the most amazing stories in the Bible, and B, because in that story are some amazing principles of how we in our lives can make it through a shipwreck the way that Paul made it through his own shipwreck. So before Casey comes, though, Jordan and Kayla are going to sing another song. And this is a great song because it teaches us that in those shipwreck moments of our lives, those dark nights, those times when we don't know what to do and the storm is coming down, we know what to do because we talked about this just 3 or 4 weeks ago, and that is to worship God. So if you know this song, man, sing along. If you don't, though, I really invite you to just listen and experience the lyrics of this song and how we respond in times of shipwreck.
I count on one thing, the same God that never fails will not fail me now. He won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. He's working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will. Oh, yes, I will. Yes, I will choose to praise you, Lord. Yes. I count on, and I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God is never late, is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Oh
what a song, and how fitting for our discussion today. I really like the line that said, the same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. That's so true. God is so good. But okay, for today, you heard the story. You heard Austin tell the story. Is the story not amazing? It's so over the top, but it's true. I'd love to see a really well done movie based off that story. It would be really cool to see. But even though it's a harsh story, it fits so much for our life right now. The points for today, they feel like points that we need to listen to in these days of COVID, politics, social unrest, all these things that are going on. People are going crazy. They're freaking out about masks, who to elect as president, or whether kids should go back to school. Everywhere I go, someone has an opinion that they're not afraid to share. They always share it. Here's what I want us to think about today, though, as we look at Paul's shipwreck. We're kind of in a shipwreck ourselves. Maybe by looking at how Paul survived it, we can see how we can survive it. Here's what I want to do first, though. Let's set the tone for the situation that Paul is in right now. We see that in Acts 27, chapter 27, verse 20. That's where we find the summary of the mood that has been set in here on the boat. Verse 20, the terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and stars until all hope was gone. In the story, things have gotten pretty bad. It's one thing for Paul to feel this way. Like, he's not a sailor. It's not his day job to deal with the hard sea. But the sailors are different. It's kind of ironic that the sailors, the ones that are used to this lifestyle, they're feeling hopeless. They're like, well, we're done here. Game over. Ironic? Well, maybe not irony. Paul is poised. It's almost like he knows that everything will be okay. Oh, that's right. He just said that. Guys, it's gonna be okay. I know it. He just said that. But how can he be so confident? Hopefully we'll find out today. So, how to survive shipwrecks. Let's look at 5 ways to do that. First, don't listen to the world's fears. The world's fears may be logical in a sense, but they're not centered on God's power or His plans. They're neither account for His provision nor His purpose. Therefore, this means that they should not be the basis for your concerns. Don't buy into the world's fears. Check this out in verse 12. And since Fair Havens was an exposed harbor, a poor place to spend the winter, most of the crew wanted to go on to Phoenix, farther up the coast to Crete, and spend the winter there. Phoenix was a good harbor with only a southwest and northwest exposure. They were afraid of being uncomfortable. That's it. That's the big scare. They're scared that it might be too uncomfortable to sit at harbor and wait out the winter, when they really should have been feared of what much more pressing things. Then finally, later, when they begin to fear the right thing, the danger of the storm, their fear is still misguided because they cannot see what God is doing. Okay, so I don't care if we are in the same room or not. Right now, raise your hand if you saw someone today, or if you did, totally freaking out about COVID or either number of other mess that's going on right now. Did you raise your hand? Yep, I bet you did. Please listen. Do not buy into the fear around you from those that are far from God. Maybe turn off the news a little more right now. Don't feed off the drama. Believe that God is in control. Don't listen to the world's fears. Maybe instead of fearing like the world fears, let's do this. So we got number 1. Number 2, keep pursuing God. Paul doesn't take his focus off the main thing. Notice that his relationship with God never even suffers through the episode. In fact, check out verse 23. For last night an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. Wait, did you just hear that? Paul is having a conversation with an angel of God in the middle of all of this. Paul never lets up. This is not some fad. His faith is not some game to him. He has a true pursuit of God. It's all he knows. That's the kind of faith for us. That's the kind of relationship with Jesus needed for us. Not a once-a-week relationship, but a true, devout, dedicated pursuit of God that doesn't stop. It's no game. Pursue God, even during this total shipwreck of a life right now, especially during the shipwreck. Okay, so far we don't listen to the world's fears and keep pursuing God. Number 3 is don't be afraid of the future. Check this out. Verse 24 says, and he, the angel, said, don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. The angel assures Paul that he has nothing to fear in the face of the shipwreck that's about to happen. Why can Paul be so sure of the future? It's almost like he isn't even scared at all. Now, I guess it's possible he has some fear. That would only make him human. Here's what I want you to see, though. Paul's confidence in the future is completely and directly related to his confidence in God. It's his relationship with God that does this. He knows, did you hear that? He knows that ultimately God's plans, they'll be carried out. Let's pause here for a minute, because I think this gets a little close to home for us. I think this really begins to sink in with where we are. Are you scared of the future? I mean, right now, is there uncertainty in your future that causes a lot of anxiety and fear? Can I just tell you, you aren't alone. I feel anxiety for the future. There's many of us that do. In fact, if you feel comfortable doing it, just right now, if you feel comfortable, why don't you type that out in the chat? Type, what is worrying you right now about the future? Let's have a vulnerable moment where we see that all of us have the anxiety for the future. So go ahead, type that right now in the chat. What makes you anxious about the future? See, I told you that we all have anxiety. This is not about just doing some mind tricks to convince yourself that there's nothing to fear. That's not what we're saying. That's not what Paul is doing here. Nope. Paul had a real, alive relationship with the God that was way bigger than any of his circumstances. And he knew that God would not forsake him. And in fact, God had good, really good intentions for Paul's future. I hope that brings you comfort. Okay, so that's number 3. Don't be afraid of the future. We had those first 3. Number 4, be calm in the face of danger. Easier said than done, right? Some people just are more naturally prone to this, right? But seriously, is that really true? Honestly, I'm not so sure. Think about this. What makes a Marine or a Navy SEAL so confident under pressure? Is it because they were born with some natural sense of just being cool under pressure? I don't think so, not really. It's because they've been pushed over and over again in training so far beyond their breaking point that there really isn't a situation anymore that can overwhelm them. I mean, they've dealt with it all. That's what happens to someone that's been walking with Jesus and have seen him provide over and over and over again. You don't have to fear. You can just remain calm and cool and react based off the knowledge that God is in control. What you believe always affects how you act. Always. Check out verse 34. Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair of your head will perish. This is Paul talking to the crew of a ship. Paul, the non-sailor, talking down the crew off the ledge, leading them through the situation. The men were frantic, yet Paul assures them by talking over the situation and leading them to do something simple. It's just so simple. Let's sit down and let's eat. But it restored their energy and their morale. And it worked. It was so simple, but it worked. I wonder if that made an impact on the sailors around him. Think about what a difference that would make in the lives of those around you. If they see you leading the way calmly, even though life is straight up raging storm. We all have friends and family that are frantic right now about every little thing in life. COVID, riots, tearing down statues, who'll be president next. Their daily opportunities to freak. But don't. Stay calm. It's possible for those that keep their focus on God through the storm. Okay, one more. Lastly, remember your mission. So if you'll remember back verse 24, the angel assured Paul that he'll get to finish his mission. Think about how odd of a promise that is. Don't worry, Paul. You're still going to get to go to Rome. Your mission hasn't changed. It's going to happen. Just be patient. Is this a mind thing? He's so focused on the mission that the details don't even seem to dwell in his focus. Like he's not even focusing on these little details. He's got his mission in mind. Kind of like blood on a jersey. Okay, so let me explain. Back in the fall of 2001, it was a Saturday, and I was scheduled to take my senior pictures. Good grief, those things are so expensive. And just to be frank, my mom was just a little bit nervous, and she was a little bit perturbed. So I showed up to take the pictures with this huge gouge in my chin. Thankfully, the photographer, he was able to Photoshop over it. It was no big deal, but the mission, that's why I had the gouge. So the night before was football homecoming. And if you didn't know, it's a big night for a team. You got to win. For years, we were terrible. So bad that the teams that usually invited us to come play for their homecoming, you always ask a terrible team to homecoming so you know you'll win. They always asked us. Terrible. We were so bad. Not in 2001, though. In 2001, we were winning regularly, and it was time for some sweet revenge. We were so confident, we didn't even schedule an easy game. We invited a decent team to play. They were pretty upset that we invited them, and it was a tough game. Towards the end, I was told by the referee, you got to go. You got to get on the sideline. And I look down, and all I see is that I'm covered in blood. Not somebody else's blood, my blood. Kind of what happens when two dudes weighing 250 and 280 go against a linebacker that tips the scale at a hefty $160 or 160 pound in layman's terms. I got hit so hard right here in the chin. 250 was here, 280 was here, and it was a gusher. To this day, I still have the scar to remember it. It shows up every once in a while. But the mission, we were going to win the game. I was so focused on that. I didn't even notice the blood. I didn't even notice the stained jersey until the referee ran over to take me out. So that was that because of talent? No, I wasn't very good. Was it because I was tough? No, I had a pretty low pain tolerance. It's simple. We bought into the mission. And when we see what God is doing and we go all in, that becomes our focus. And these little bitty details, they seem to fade to the background. That's what we see with Paul here too. He's zeroed in, he's lasered in on the mission, and he isn't going to let anything stop that. So what does that look like for us? How does the day-to-day details of your life change when you go all into the mission of God? You don't have to be tough. This isn't some plea from me to just be the strongest one standing and you'll make it through life. That's not what this is about. Remember, I said, what we believe affects how we live. So believe. Believe that God is in control so there's nothing to fear. Believe that God has placed you here for His mission. Buy into the mission and always keep that the main thing. You'll be amazed at where God leads you and what He leads you through. Okay, that's it. But before we turn it back over to Austin to finish up, I'd love to just pray for you. Let's do that now. God, I just pray that we would get it through our minds that getting through this life has nothing to do with being the toughest or being the one that can absorb the most pain or anything like that. It's all about how we believe that you are bigger than all this mess and that you have a plan for us that is good, God. Let us really hold to that. God, help us really grab onto your mission and let us that be our focus. This mission of the gospel going forward and this mission that nothing will trump your church from spreading the gospel to the world. Let that be our driving force and let us be like Paul where even when we're going through shipwrecks, we kind of overlook some of those details because we're so focused on you, God. That was what will carry us through the storms. Your power is what will carry us through the storms, God. And just let us hold to that truth and believe it and live it. We love you. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen.
And I love what Casey said there about how we follow the mission of God. It's amazing where God will lead us and what He can lead us through. Focusing on God's mission. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more next week from Matthew chapter 28. But in terms of what the mission of God is for all of us and for Common Ground Online. Now, I want to just for a minute ask you to start setting your calendar for something. and that is for the calendar for the 16th of August, 2 weeks from tonight, 5 o'clock. We're not going to have a church service on this platform. Instead, what we are going to do is we're going to have a Zoom meeting, okay? Now, that Zoom meeting will probably take somewhere between 30, 45 minutes or so, and we're going to be casting a little bit clearer vision for what Common Ground Online looks like. So I'm going to ask you, as people who have been watching these services, for those of you that are in Las Vegas as a part of Common Ground, and anybody, and you're watching this later, and you're even sort of interested in what Common Ground Online is going to look like, I want to go ahead and get you to sign up for that Zoom meeting. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. There's a link that's going to pop up right now. You can click on that link. It may freeze me for a while, but you can come back and just fill out the form. 3 questions is all it is. Right now, I'm actually going to do that. So let's just take a break. Everybody do it. If you're watching this later, go to cgvegas.org, cgvegas.org/connect, and you'll get a chance to have this pop up. 3 questions. Let's all do it right now. All right, thanks for doing that. We have picked a date of September the 13th, the Sunday right after Labor Day, to kind of switch everything over to where our website changes, and we'll start looking at community groups again, not only in Las Vegas, but in other cities, and some other things are going to change at that point. And I just want to ask you to be on this journey with us. You know, no matter where you live, no matter what you do, be a part of Common Ground Online. We would love to have this be your church. Not because we're trying to build the greatest, biggest thing in the world, but because we want to be on mission together with you. And we want to make disciples everywhere we go. And the way that Casey just so perfectly put it, that it's amazing what God will do through you when we're on mission together. And so we'd love to have you on that mission. If you need prayer, make sure you click that prayer button and we'll be available for you. If you have any questions or concerns about anything going on, feel free to email me, austin@austinryan.com, or if you have my cell phone number, man, don't hesitate for a second to send me a text or a call, and let's start to talk through what Common Ground Online is going to look like. But the 16th of September, please plan on being available for that. If you filled out that form, we'll either text or email you the Zoom link and all that on how to get involved. And then lastly, kids, rock and roll. Here's your link. Go ahead and pop onto that right now. Chelsea's waiting to have a great time with you. Love you guys. We'll talk soon.